Hi, my name is Vanessa de Oliveira Andreotti. I'm a full professor at the University of British Columbia. I'm also a Canada Research Chair in Race Inequalities and Global Change. I'm in this beautiful place called Gorca as part of a summer program, the Gorca Earth Care Summer Program. I'm a mentor of the project and I'm also a researcher looking at the pedagogical experiments going on here. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about why I think this project is important and maybe a little bit about what's going on here as well, using some pictures and research notes. So first of all, I've been working in the field of global education for about 20 years, and part of my work looks at the mainstream practices of global education and the kind of pedagogical foundations of those practices and assumptions that um, go along with these practices, and then the effectiveness of these practices in terms of building relationships and creating new forms of existence. So part of what I have found through my research, my empirical research, is that global education practices tend to be based on the assumption that by changing convictions, we can change behaviors and relationships. And this is only partly true. Our relationships are not necessarily mediated by convictions. This is an assumption, a modernist assumption that is challenged by many theories, even with theories that are emerging from modernity, but also theories of education that emerge in different contexts, ontological and metaphysical contexts, including the context of many indigenous cultures. So the other side of my work has been working with indigenous communities and trying to understand how they can offer something different to what we're used to in the mainstream and what we perceive to be the only option. I don't believe indigenous communities can offer an answer, but they can offer different understandings that can show us that it's possible to think very differently. And they can offer practices that are really important for us to be able to develop other sensibilities, other dispositions, and other ways of relating to the world. So um, I think what has been very present in my work for the past 6 to 8 years is that for us to solve the mess that we're in today, the global mess, the global challenges that we face that are unprecedented and they're wicked in their nature, right? They're extremely complex and interdependent. We will need more than thinking that comes from the same paradigm that created the problems in the first place, right? So for us to get to the edge of this paradigm and invite it into another way of not only knowing but being, we need a different kind of pedagogy. And I've been uh, thinking about the limitations of a pedagogy that is just transmissive, or even pedagogies that claim to be transformative and involve people, but that um, do not consider our relationships beyond knowledge production, right? So I think that our relationship to knowledge production is extremely problematic. So then there's the other problem with it is that if all our education is institutionalized through not only through formal institutions like the university or schooling, but even through NGOs, right? That also poses a problem because the prescription of that education comes tied to certain expectations related to the nation state, to Western humanism, to global capitalism in terms of social mobility and inclusion in existing economic structures that are unsustainable and harmful. So, what I think is important for us to understand here in Gorza is that um, we have started thinking about um, this project collectively and trying to understand the problems we face as metabolic process problems, right? So instead of thinking about the individual as just piece of a machine that is already prescribed for us. We are trying to work with an expanded notion of the self. So instead of thinking it just about me or me and you, we're thinking about me in you, and also a layer of self that is not bound by time or space or form, which is about an I that is neither me nor you, because we are over the course of lifetimes, or even maybe the course of life itself, the temporality goes beyond that. And if we think about it like this, and if we see ourselves as part of a metabolism, we will understand our affect, our emotions, our intellect, our physical bodies, and our our existence, right? Um, in very different ways, in layered ways. So it's not about getting rid of individuality, but seeing it as part of a layered way of understanding ourselves and each other. And in this way of thinking, which is inspired by ideas of perspectivism, entanglement, um, and relationality that are non-Western, right? In this idea of entanglement, of non-separability, we start to understand the problems as metabolic problems, as I said, and we start to see that we are addicted, we are intellectually, affectively, physically, and existentially addicted to certain things that are preventing um, our being otherwise, right? That are taking us to a form of being that is harmful both to ourselves and to others, because the violence we commit to others is violence committed towards ourselves. So, in this context, the Gorca project is a project about trying to syntonize, to tune in into um, a different understanding of the self, and which is beyond this self, right? So trying to take responsibility for being part of a wider metabolism, and trying to interrupt the addictions that we are used to, addictions of projections, of compensations for trauma, of disconnection, and of distraction. And the beauty of the space helps a lot with that. Contact with nature also helps. Manual labor helps. The ceremonies help, and um, and and they enable different kinds of intellectual discussions that are not just based on this desire for consensus, or this conditional participation where we expect affirmation, validation, and agreement. So, what is happening here is that we're trying to experiment with pedagogical choices and strategies that can take us to the edge of what is possible, what has been possible so far, and invite us beyond that towards possibilities that are viable but unthinkable from within the paradigms we are socialized in. Um, this involves a very deep understanding of the difference between wants and needs. It also involves a willingness to see complexities, paradoxes, and even failure as integral part of the process. Because if we're multi-layered, complex beings, uh, we need to understand the difference within us too, and how our socialization, our desires, um, our passions, and our projections play out, right, in the daily in ways that are not necessarily conscious. So the experiment so far has been extremely interesting and useful, and changing the ways that we evaluate this is actually quite important too, because evaluation needs to be ongoing, but it needs to be full of generosity, humility, and compassion, right? So witnessing this process has been extremely exhausting and generative as well, because you have to be with the group, with the dynamic of the group, with well, you have to be present, and you have to be in resonance with what's happening, and you have to let go of your projections. You have to release things that are also triggering for you, and you have to try to find balance in um, in the rhythm of the group, in the compass, in the temporality. So you have to kind of create a meta compass that helps people find their internal compass, and then create a syntony both with the group, with the space, with and then beyond, with our global relations and our global connections, and finding the right balance between the kind of work that is needed, both the intellectual work, the work with questions of existence, the deeper questions, the work, the physical work, and the affective work that is necessary, including both political aspects and discussions, as well as um, metaphoric and artistic aspects of it that are intrinsic also to our being, is a challenge. Like creating the right equation that will work for bringing this group together, and um, taking them to deeper levels of discussion where we go into difficult places without relationships falling apart, is really difficult, especially then when we have people from across um, systemic and historical divides. So we have here indigenous people, people who see themselves as minorities, people who are racialized, together with people who see themselves as privileged and have been privileged, and benefit from and enjoy this privilege. We have people without um, much formal education, and we have people who are highly educated in the formal system together, and having to cook together, to live together, to dance together, to learn together, to work together. And that is an extremely rich environment for us to learn about what is possible in global education and what is necessary. So I think that if educators are working with the institutionalized system, so in formal education in universities or in NGOs, this could be a really, really generative place to be, because if we don't exercise a deeper level of global education within ourselves, what we do in our day-to-day work may become very repetitive, and many times very superficial. So that's what I hear from educators when I work with them, that they lack the headspace and the time to actually explore things at their own level. And this space gives people that, and brings together people who have been involved in global education, sometimes not calling it global education, uh, to ask them to live this in their body and through the land and with each other, and to relate to this global community in a very different way, receiving the gifts from other intellectual traditions without having to um, diminish their own, right? It's just an integration. We call it, we talk here about an integration of medicines. And I think the space gives people the opportunity to do that and to learn to integrate these things in a very different way. Um, so I'm very excited about being here, and I believe that this is the kind of education that's worth the investment of my time and my energy, since this 20 years of research in this area, plus a few more years as a teacher, have shown me that working with convictions, although beneficial and important, is very limited in terms of the changes we can see in people. It's very limited in dealing with indifference, as we see today in the polarization of perspectives and the affective response to the notion of scarcity that is causing people to be afraid of each other and not realize that the promises they have been made of unending growth and consumption are actually unrealistic promises, or that people would find happiness in it, right? So people are looking and yearning for something, and this yearning is confused with other things. So it's extremely important at this point for us to find another kind of education that can touch us deep at our core, deeper than the heart. I would say needs to touch us viscerally, so that we realize we're really part of each other. We are one system, and that the harm that I do to others, I do to myself. If we don't realize that quickly, we may end up in we may end up repeating history in extremely violent conflict. We're already doing that. So I think in terms of eco-social innovations, this is an amazing project. I am very excited, as I said before, and am looking forward to seeing what this is going to do to change global education elsewhere. Thank you.